The blade trembled in her hand, not from fear, but from the impossible warmth spreading through her chest where his light touched her darkness. Lyra had killed 100 men without hesitation, but as Caelum's golden eyes met hers across the altar of their forced union, she realized she was about to commit the most dangerous act of her life, falling in love with the enemy. "Do you take this guardian as your bound?" The ancient voice echoed through the cathedral of shadows and starlight. Her answer would either save 2 worlds or destroy them both. The obsidian blade sang as it sliced through the throat of her target, but Lyra felt nothing. She never did anymore. 23 kills this month, each one as meaningless as morning mist, until the shadow messenger materialized behind her, carrying words that would shatter her world like glass. "The council demands your presence," the wraith whispered, its voice like autumn leaves scraping stone. "The ancient treaty calls assassin. Your blade has served the darkness well, but now," the creature paused, savoring the moment, "now you must serve in ways that will cut deeper than any weapon you've ever wielded." Lyra's hand tightened on her dagger's hilt. In 3 centuries of killing, she'd never questioned an order, never hesitated, never felt the cold finger of dread trace her spine like it did now. The council only summoned their best when the realm itself hung in the balance, or when they needed someone expendable for an impossible task. The throne room of shadows stretched before her like a cathedral of nightmares, its walls breathing with ancient malice. 7 figures sat shrouded in darkness so complete it seemed to devour light itself. She'd stood here countless times, receiving death sentences for others. Tonight felt different. Tonight, the darkness seemed to whisper her name. "Lyra Nightwhisper," the center figure spoke, voice echoing from everywhere and nowhere. 300 years you've served. 300 years of perfect obedience. Tonight, we ask for something far more precious than your skill. The shadow leaned forward, and she caught a glimpse of eyes like dying stars. "We ask for your life." The words hit her like a physical blow. Not death. She'd welcomed that possibility long ago. Something worse. Something that would strip away everything she'd built, everything she was. As the council's true demand unfolded, Lyra realized that some fates were indeed worse than death. But what could possibly terrify the realm's most feared assassin more than dying? The answer would redefine everything she thought she knew about sacrifice. The Cathedral of Twilight existed in the space between heartbeats, where shadow met light, and neither could claim victory. Lyra had heard whispers of this place, a neutral ground built from the bones of the First War, where ancient magic held even the most bitter enemies in check. Standing at its threshold, she understood why diplomats spoke of it in hushed, reverent tones. "Well, I'll be damned," she muttered, borrowing a phrase she'd heard from a dying American soldier decades ago. The cathedral's spires twisted impossibly upward, neither fully dark nor bright, but something altogether more unsettling. It was beautiful in the way a blade was beautiful, perfect, deadly, and absolutely unforgiving. Her footsteps echoed against marble that seemed to shift between obsidian and pearl with each breath. Somewhere in this sacred space waited her intended, Caelum, guardian of light, the man she was supposed to bind herself to in unholy matrimony. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent centuries perfecting the art of ending lives, and now she was about to begin one she'd never wanted. The massive doors groaned open, revealing a figure that made her breath catch in her throat. This wasn't the blazing warrior of legend, all righteous fury and blinding radiance. Caelum stood with his back to her, studying a stained glass window that depicted the first treaty between their realms. His shoulders carried the weight of responsibility like a well-worn cloak, and when he turned, those eyes, golden like sunrise, but tired in a way that spoke of battles fought in silence, of victories that felt like losses. He was beautiful, yes, but it was the beauty of a sword that had seen too much blood, too much war. When their gazes met across the sacred space, something shifted in the air between them. Not attraction, not yet, but recognition. 2 weapons, finally meeting their match. "So," Caelum said, his voice carrying the warmth of summer mornings and the edge of winter storms, "you're the woman who's supposed to be my salvation or my destruction." He stepped closer, and Lyra caught the scent of sunlight and steel. "Funny thing is, I can't tell which one I'm hoping for. In a place where light and shadow danced as equals, Two enemies were about to discover that some bonds are forged not in heaven or hell, but in the spaces between. The ancient words felt like poison on Lyra's tongue, each syllable binding her deeper into a fate she'd never chosen. The officiant, a being so old it remembered when the realms were one, spoke in languages that predated human civilization, weaving magic that made the air itself hum with power. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a ritual that would fundamentally alter the fabric of reality. Do you, Lyra of the endless night, take this guardian as your bound, to share power, to share burden, to share the weight of worlds? The words echoed through the cathedral like a death knell. Her "I do" came out as barely a whisper, but the magic seized it, amplified it, made it a promise that would outlast stars. Caelum's hand was warm when she took it, impossibly, dangerously warm. The moment their skin touched, light exploded behind her eyes. Not the harsh, burning radiance she'd expected, but something softer, like dawn breaking over a world she'd never seen. Her shadow-touched flesh should have recoiled, should have withered under his touch. Instead, it sang. "What the hell?" she started, but the officiant's voice cut through her shock like a blade through silk. The binding was accelerating, their essences beginning to merge in ways the ancient text had only hinted at. Around them, the cathedral's windows blazed with impossible colors as light and shadow began their eternal dance. Caelum's grip tightened on her hand, his golden eyes wide with the same shock she felt. "This isn't supposed to happen," he whispered, but his voice carried wonder instead of fear. The prophecies spoke of balance, but this, the light radiating from their joined hands, pulsed like a heartbeat, like something alive and aware and utterly unprecedented. The officiant's ancient voice rose to a crescendo, sealing bonds that had never been tested, creating something that had never existed. As the final words echoed through the sacred space, Lyra felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. Not her heart, but something deeper. Something that whispered this was only the beginning. But when ancient magic creates something entirely new, the old rules no longer apply, and neither realm was prepared for what they'd just unleashed. The castle materialized around them like a fever dream, its architecture defying every law of physics and magic Lyra thought she understood. Walls of living shadow supported arches of crystallized light, creating a structure that shouldn't exist, but somehow felt more real than anything she'd ever experienced. This was their new home, a place that belonged to neither realm, and somehow to both. "Welcome to the threshold," Caelum said, his voice carrying an odd mixture of pride and uncertainty. "It's been waiting for us, apparently. The magic knew we were coming long before we did." He gestured to the impossible hallways that stretched in directions that hurt to contemplate. "Fair warning, the geography here has a sense of humor. Don't be surprised if your bedroom decides to relocate itself." Lyra ran her fingers along a wall that felt like cool silk and warm stone simultaneously. The castle was alive, she realized. Not just magically animated, but genuinely alive, breathing with their combined essences. "This is either the most beautiful prison ever created," she murmured, "or the most elaborate tomb. I haven't decided which yet." Their footsteps echoed differently here. His rang like silver bells, hers whispered like wind through graveyards. But together they created something that sounded almost like music. The castle seemed to approve, walls shifting subtly to accommodate their passage, doors opening before they reached them. It was unsettling and oddly comforting at the same time. "The servants' quarters are through there." Caelum pointed to a corridor that definitely hadn't existed moments before. "Though I suspect we won't need much help. This place seems to anticipate our needs." He paused at a grand staircase that spiraled upward into shadows and light. "Your chambers are on the shadow side, mine on the light." The castle insisted on the separation. As they climbed the impossible stairs, Lyra caught glimpses of rooms that defied description. A library where books wrote themselves, a garden where flowers bloomed in darkness and withered in light, a training room where weapons hung in perfect balance between creation and destruction. This wasn't just a home, it was a testament to what they might become together. But in a castle that responded to their deepest desires, what would happen when those desires began to change? Some thresholds, once crossed, lead to places you can never return from. The shadow wing of the castle embraced Lyra like an old friend, its darkness cool and familiar against her skin. Her chambers were exactly what she would have chosen, if she'd had the imagination to dream of something so perfect. Obsidian walls reflected her movements like black mirrors, and the bed was carved from a single piece of midnight dark wood that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. But sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt him. Caelum's presence like a warm pulse in the back of her mind, steady as a heartbeat, bright as a candle in the darkness of her thoughts. The binding had created more than a political alliance. It had forged a connection that made privacy feel like a foreign concept. 3 floors above, she could sense him pacing. His restlessness bled through their bond like ink through water, carrying flavors of confusion, duty, and something else she didn't want to name. When had she become so attuned to another person's emotions? In 3 centuries of solitude, she'd forgotten what it felt like to be aware of someone else's inner world. The nightmares came anyway, as they always did. Faces of the dead, voices of the dying, the weight of centuries pressing down on her chest like a stone. But tonight was different. Tonight, when the darkness of her past threatened to drown her, a golden thread of warmth wound through the terror, offering an anchor she'd never had before. She woke to find Caelum standing in her doorway, his hair mussed from sleep, concern etched in every line of his face. "I felt," he started, then stopped, running a hand through his golden locks. "The bond, your pain. I couldn't just lie there and pretend I didn't feel you drowning." "I don't need your pity," Lyra said, but the words lacked their usual venom. Something about the way he looked at her, not with disgust or fear, but with understanding, made her defenses feel suddenly fragile. "I've been having nightmares for centuries. They're nothing new." But as Caelum's light touched the edges of her darkness, both began to wonder, what happens when 2 people bound by magic start to care about each other's pain? Some rescues come from the most unexpected places. Dawn broke over the threshold like a symphony of gold and silver, and Lyra discovered that her new husband was apparently one of those insufferably cheerful morning people. She found him in the castle's central courtyard, moving through what looked like a meditation routine that involved enough graceful combat forms to make her assassin's instincts sit up and take notice. "Morning, sunshine," she drawled, borrowing another Americanism as she settled against a pillar to watch. The man moved like water given form, each gesture flowing into the next with a precision that spoke of decades of practice. It was beautiful in a way that made her chest tight, not the harsh beauty of violence she knew so well, but something softer, more purposeful. Caelum completed his sequence and turned to her with a smile that could have powered a small city. "You're up early for someone who prowls the night." His hair caught the morning light like spun gold, and she had to resist the urge to see if it felt as soft as it looked. "I wasn't sure if you'd dissolved into mist with the sunrise." "Disappointed?" she asked, but there was no real bite in it. Something about the way he looked at her, like she was a puzzle he genuinely wanted to solve rather than a problem to be managed, made her usual sarcasm feel unnecessary. "Honestly? No." He grabbed a towel from a bench that definitely hadn't been there moments before. The castle's helpful nature was going to take some getting used to. "I was hoping you might join me for breakfast. Nothing fancy, just..." He gestured vaguely at the space between them. Getting to know each other seemed like a good place to start. The dining room materialized around them as they walked, complete with a table set for 2, and food that somehow perfectly balanced both their preferences. Lyra stared at the spread, delicate pastries that looked like they belonged in a light realm palace alongside dark bread that reminded her of home. The castle, it seemed, was determined to find middle ground even in the smallest details. But as they sat across from each other in the morning light, both began to realize that some bridges are built one small gesture at a time, and some of the most dangerous journeys begin with a simple invitation to breakfast. The delegation arrived like a storm cloud on a clear day, their presence turning the castle's harmonious atmosphere into something sharp and brittle. Representatives from both realms materialized in the great hall, with all the subtlety of a declaration of war, their faces carved from stone and their expectations heavy as lead. Lord Caelum, the Light Tribunal's speaker, stepped forward, her radiance so intense it made the shadows recoil. "Lady Lyra," the title dripped from her lips like poison. "We trust you understand the delicate nature of your situation. This union serves a purpose beyond your personal comfort." Lyra felt Caelum tense beside her, his light flickering with barely contained irritation. The Shadow Council's representative, a figure she recognized as Master Vex, her former handler, smiled with all the warmth of a winter grave. Indeed, The treaty requires cooperation, not attachment. We would hate for personal feelings to compromise your effectiveness. Funny thing about effectiveness, Lyra said, her voice carrying the silky menace that had preceded 1,000 deaths. It tends to improve when people aren't constantly looking over your shoulder, questioning every decision. She stepped closer to the delegation, and shadows began to writhe around her feet like living things. Unless, of course, you're questioning our competence. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Caelum moved to stand beside her. Not in front of her, she noted with surprise, but beside her, presenting a united front. His light didn't push back her shadows. Instead, it wove through them, creating patterns that were somehow more beautiful than either element alone. "We question nothing," Master Vex said, but his eyes narrowed as he watched their combined display. "We merely remind you that some bonds are meant to be tools, not complications. The realms have expectations, and failure to meet them carries consequences you would both find unpleasant." As the delegations departed, leaving threats hanging in the air like smoke, Lyra realized something had shifted between her and Caelum. They'd defended each other instinctively, without discussion or planning. The bond was changing them in ways that went far beyond magic. But when two realms built on opposition suddenly find their champions working in harmony, the old order begins to crack, and some cracks can bring down entire worlds. The attack came at midnight, because of course it did. Lyra was beginning to think the universe had a twisted sense of timing. She rolled out of bed as the castle's warning bells, apparently it had those now, began to toll, her daggers already in her hands before her feet hit the floor. Through their bond, she felt Caelum's instant alertness, his power blazing to life like a star being born. "Shadow wraiths," she called as she sprinted through corridors that rearranged themselves to speed her passage. At least a dozen, maybe more. They're not here for a social call. The creatures were pouring through the castle's defenses like smoke through a screen, their forms shifting and writhing with malevolent purpose. She found Caelum in the great hall, surrounded by a circle of blazing light that held the wraiths at bay but couldn't destroy them. His face was set in lines of concentration, sweat beading on his forehead from the effort of maintaining his barrier. "They're not ordinary wraiths," he called over the sound of otherworldly shrieking. "Someone's enhanced them. My light can't touch them." "Then don't touch them," Lyra said, sliding into the circle beside him. "Contain them." Without thinking, she reached for his hand, and the moment their fingers intertwined, something extraordinary happened. Her shadows didn't fight his light. They danced with it, creating something entirely new. The wraiths screamed as tendrils of shadow-touched light lashed out, not destroying them, but binding them, holding them in place with bonds they couldn't break. Lyra and Caelum moved as one, their combined power flowing like a river that had finally found its proper course. Where his light touched her darkness, it didn't burn. It illuminated, revealing depths and possibilities neither had imagined. "Well, I'll be damned," Caelum breathed as the last wraith dissolved into harmless mist. "That shouldn't be possible. Light and shadow don't—" He stopped, staring at their joined hands where power still crackled between them like captured lightning. "We're not supposed to be able to do that." Lyra felt the same awe, the same disbelief. In 3 centuries of wielding shadow magic, she'd never experienced anything like this. Her power hadn't been diminished by his presence. It had been transformed, elevated into something that felt less like a weapon and more like art. "The prophecies," she whispered. "They spoke of balance. But this isn't balance. This is evolution." The castle around them hummed with approval, its walls glowing softly with the residual energy of their combined magic. Scorch marks on the floor showed where the wraiths had tried to break through, but there was something else. Patterns in the stone that looked almost like writing, as if their power had left a message neither could yet read. "Someone sent those things to test us," Caelum said, his tactical mind already working through the implications. "They wanted to see what we could do together. The question is whether they're pleased or terrified by the answer." As they stood in the aftermath of their first real battle as partners, both felt the weight of what they'd discovered. They weren't just politically bound anymore. They were becoming something new, something that neither realm had anticipated. And in a world built on the eternal conflict between light and shadow, evolution was the most dangerous force of all. But when ancient enemies discover they're stronger together than apart, Who benefits, and who has the most to lose? Some alliances reshape the world, while others threaten to tear it apart. The castle's training room materialized exactly when they needed it, complete with weapons that seemed forged from crystallized moonlight and shadows given form. Lyra ran her fingers along a blade that felt familiar, despite being unlike anything she'd ever wielded. It was hers, somehow, created by the castle's magic to match her evolving abilities. "We need to understand what happened last night," Caelum said, selecting a sword that blazed with contained starfire. "If we're going to face whatever's coming, we need to know our limits." He moved into a ready stance, and Lyra couldn't help but admire the way he held himself. Balanced, confident, but not arrogant. "Care to dance?" Their first exchange was tentative, testing. Lyra's daggers wove patterns of darkness, while Caelum's blade traced arcs of light, and where their weapons met, reality seemed to bend. She was fast, faster than most beings had a right to be, but he matched her speed with an economy of motion that spoke of centuries of experience. "You're holding back," she accused, spinning away from a strike that could have ended the match. "I can feel it through the bond. You're afraid you'll hurt me." The accusation hung in the air between them, sharp as any blade. Caelum's next attack came with the full force of his power behind it, light blazing from his sword in waves that should have blinded her. Instead, Lyra found herself moving through the radiance like it was her natural element, her shadows not fleeing from his light, but embracing it, using it to become something more than either element alone. "Holy hell," she breathed, catching his blade between her crossed daggers. They were inches apart now, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his skin. "We're not just compatible. We're complementary. Your light doesn't destroy my shadows. It gives them form." The realization hit them both at the same moment. This wasn't just about magic or politics or ancient treaties. They were becoming something unprecedented, something that could reshape the fundamental nature of both their realms. And as they stood locked in combat that felt more like an intimate dance, both began to understand that some partnerships transcend everything you thought you knew about yourself. But when two warriors discover they fight better together than apart, the line between battle and seduction becomes dangerously thin, and some dances lead to places you never intended to go. Dinner had become a ritual neither of them acknowledged, but both anticipated. Tonight, the castle had outdone itself. The dining room overlooked a garden that existed in perpetual twilight, where flowers bloomed in impossible colors and fountains sang with voices like distant chimes. It was beautiful enough to make even an assassin's heart skip a beat. "Tell me about your first kill," Caelum said, cutting into what appeared to be roasted something or other that tasted like sunshine and memories. The question should have been jarring, inappropriate, but somehow it felt natural. Not the details, just, "How old were you? What did it feel like?" Lyra paused, her fork halfway to her mouth. In 3 centuries, no one had ever asked her that question with genuine curiosity, rather than morbid fascination. 12, she said finally. "A rival assassin who'd been sent to eliminate my trainer. I thought I was saving someone I cared about." She took a sip of wine that tasted like midnight and starlight. "Turns out he'd orchestrated the whole thing. Wanted to see if I had what it took." "Jesus," Caelum breathed, using an oath she'd heard from human soldiers. 12 years old. That's not training. That's child abuse. His light flickered with anger, not at her but for her, and something in her chest loosened at the distinction. "What about you?" she asked, deflecting from memories that still cut like glass. "When did you first realize you were destined to be a guardian? When did the light choose you?" She'd always assumed beings like him were born to their roles, shaped from birth to be perfect soldiers of righteousness. Caelum's laugh was bitter as winter wind. "The light didn't choose me. I chose it." He set down his fork, his golden eyes distant with memory. "I was 17 when shadow wraiths attacked my village, killed everyone. My parents, my sister, my betrothed. I was the only survivor, and I spent 3 days digging graves in ground that was still warm with their blood." The silence stretched between them, heavy with shared understanding. They were both products of violence, shaped by loss into weapons that served causes larger than themselves. But sitting here in the castle's gentle twilight, they felt less like weapons and more like people. Damaged, complicated people who'd found something unexpected in each other. But when two souls forged in darkness discover they can create light together, the past becomes both a burden and a bridge. And some conversations change everything you thought you knew about destiny. The garden revealed itself on their third week together, appearing behind a door that had definitely been a broom closet the day before. Lyra pushed through trailing vines that felt like silk and starlight, emerging into a space that made her breath catch in her throat. This wasn't just beautiful, it was impossible. A place where the laws of nature bent to accommodate something entirely new. "Would you look at that?" Caelum whispered behind her, his voice filled with the same wonder she felt. Flowers bloomed here that existed nowhere else. Petals of crystallized shadow supporting centers of liquid light. Vines that grew in spirals of darkness and radiance intertwined. The castle's been busy. It's creating things that have never existed before. They walked deeper into the garden, following paths that seemed to shift and change with their footsteps. Here, a fountain where water fell upward in streams of silver and obsidian. There, a tree whose leaves chimed like bells when the wind touched them. Each note a perfect harmony of major and minor keys. Everything here was a marriage of opposites, a testament to what they were becoming. "It's us," Lyra realized, stopping beside a rose bush where blooms of pure shadow nestled against flowers of captured starlight. "The garden is reflecting our bond. Look." She reached out to touch one of the impossible flowers, and it pulsed with warmth that felt exactly like the connection between them. Caelum moved to stand behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "The prophecies spoke of balance," he said softly, his breath stirring the hair at her nape. "But this isn't balance. This is synthesis. We're not canceling each other out. We're creating something entirely new." When she turned to face him, they were inches apart, close enough that she could count the gold flecks in his eyes, close enough to see her own reflection in their depths. The air between them crackled with more than magic, with possibility, with desire, with the terrifying recognition that they were standing at the edge of something that would change everything. His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone with reverent gentleness. "Lyra," he whispered, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer, like a promise, like the beginning of something that could save them both, or destroy everything they'd ever known. But in a garden where impossible things bloom, the most dangerous flower of all might be the one growing between two hearts that were never supposed to beat in harmony. The screaming started at 3 a.m, tearing through the castle's peaceful silence like claws through silk. Caelum was moving before he was fully awake, their bond pulling him through corridors that rearranged themselves to speed his passage. He found Lyra's door standing open, shadows writhing around the frame like living things in pain. She was trapped in her bed, caught in the grip of a nightmare so vivid he could feel its edges through their connection. Her body thrashed against invisible bonds while her voice broke on words in languages he didn't recognize. Pleas, curses, the names of the dead. The shadows in her room responded to her distress, reaching out like desperate hands seeking comfort that never came. "Lyra," he approached slowly, hands visible, voice gentle. "You're safe. You're in the threshold. The past can't touch you here." But even as he spoke, he could feel the weight of her memories pressing against his consciousness. Centuries of blood and death and choices that had carved pieces from her soul. Her eyes snapped open, wild and unfocused, and for a moment he saw her as she must have been at 12, terrified, alone, shaped by violence into something that could survive in a world that showed no mercy. "Caelum?" His name came out as barely a whisper, broken and raw. "I'm here," he said, settling carefully on the edge of her bed. "The bond. I felt your pain. I couldn't just lie there and pretend I didn't feel you drowning." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, but instead she caught his hand like a lifeline. "They never stop," she whispered, her voice small in the darkness. "The faces, the voices, 300 years of killing, and they all want to know why. Why them? Why not someone else? Why couldn't I have chosen differently?" Tears tracked silver paths down her cheeks, and each one felt like a knife in his chest. Without thinking, he pulled her against him, wrapping his arms around her trembling form. His light rose instinctively, not the blazing radiance of battle, but something softer, warmer, the gentle glow of dawn breaking over a world at peace. "You survived," he murmured into her hair. "Whatever you had to do, Whatever choices you made, you survived. And maybe that was the point. Maybe you survived so you could be here now, so you could become something more than what they made you. But when comfort comes from the most unexpected source, it can heal wounds you didn't know you carried, or open doors to rooms in your heart you'd kept locked for centuries. The arrow came out of nowhere, a streak of shadow-forged death aimed directly at Caelum's heart. Lyra moved without thinking, her body intercepting the projectile's path with fluid grace born of centuries of combat. The arrowhead bit deep into her shoulder, sending liquid fire racing through her veins as poison began its deadly work. "Son of a bitch!" she snarled, snapping the arrow's shaft and spinning to face their attackers. 3 figures materialized from the garden's shadows, assassins from her own realm, their faces hidden behind masks she recognized. The Shadow Council had sent her former colleagues to finish what politics couldn't accomplish. Caelum's roar of fury shook the castle's foundations as light exploded from him in waves that turned night to blazing day. But these weren't ordinary killers. They'd come prepared for his power, their weapons and armor inscribed with runes that deflected his radiance like mirrors reflecting sunlight. "The poison," the lead assassin called, his voice muffled by his mask. "Shadow's kiss. She has maybe 10 minutes before it reaches her heart. Surrender now, Guardian, and we'll make her death quick." The casual cruelty in his tone made something primal and violent wake up in Caelum's chest. "Like hell!" Lyra gasped, her daggers appearing in her hands despite the poison burning through her system. "You want him? You go through me first." But even as she spoke, she could feel her strength ebbing, her vision starting to blur at the edges. The battle was brief and brutal. Caelum fought like a man possessed, his light taking on qualities she'd never seen before. Not just illumination, but heat, force, the raw power of stars being born. When the last assassin fell, he was at her side in an instant, his hands glowing with healing energy. "The poison," she whispered, her lips already turning blue. "It's designed to kill shadow-touched. Your light can't—" But his power was already flowing into her, not fighting the poison but transforming it, turning something meant to destroy into something that could heal. As warmth flooded back into her limbs and her vision cleared, Lyra realized something fundamental had changed. Caelum hadn't just saved her life, he'd chosen her over his own realm's expectations, over centuries of conditioning that said light and shadow were eternal enemies. But when someone risks everything to save you, the debt goes deeper than gratitude. And some rescues bind hearts more surely than any magic ever could. The infirmary materialized around them like a prayer answered, complete with supplies that seemed to anticipate their every need. Caelum's hands shook as he helped Lyra onto the examination table, the reality of how close he'd come to losing her hitting him like a physical blow. The poison had left silver traces under her skin, delicate as frost patterns, but deadly as any blade. "Hold still," he murmured, his healing light flowing gentle and warm between his palms. "The poison's neutralized, but there's still damage to repair. This might hurt." His touch was reverent, careful, as if she were made of spun glass instead of shadow and steel. "I've had worse," she said, but her voice was softer than usual, thoughtful. "You saved my life. Your own people sent those assassins, didn't they? And you chose to heal me instead of letting their poison do their work for them." The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither was quite ready to face. Caelum's light flickered as his concentration wavered. "They weren't my people," he said quietly. "Not anymore. The moment they tried to hurt you, they stopped being anything to me." His hand stilled on her shoulder, and when he looked up, his golden eyes were fierce with an emotion that made her breath catch. "You're my partner, my wife. That means something to me, even if it doesn't to them." The word wife sent an unexpected jolt through her system, warming places in her chest that had been cold for centuries. When had she stopped thinking of this as a political arrangement? When had it become something real, something worth protecting? "Your turn," she said, gesturing to the cuts and bruises he'd sustained in the fight. "Don't think I didn't notice you bleeding all over my infirmary." Her shadows rose without conscious thought, cool and soothing as they began to knit his wounds closed. "Fair's fair, Guardian." They worked in comfortable silence, healing each other with a tenderness that felt more intimate than any kiss. Her shadows didn't fight his light anymore. They danced together, creating something that was neither fully dark nor bright, but somehow perfect in its balance. But when two people learn to heal each other's wounds, they discover that some scars run deeper than flesh, and some healing requires more than magic. Victory tasted like starlight and shadow, like the impossible moment when dawn meets dusk and the world holds its breath. They stood in the garden where it all began, surrounded by flowers that bloomed in celebration of their survival, their triumph over forces that would have torn them apart. The air itself seemed to shimmer with possibility. "We did it," Caelum said, his voice filled with wonder and disbelief. "We actually did it. We fought off assassins from both our realms and lived to tell about it." His light pulsed with joy, with relief, with something deeper that made Lyra's heart skip against her ribs. "Don't sound so surprised," she teased, but her usual sarcasm was tempered with something softer, warmer. "We make a pretty good team when we're not trying to kill each other." The admission felt dangerous, like stepping off a cliff and trusting that someone would catch her. They were standing close now, drawn together by gravity that had nothing to do with magic, and everything to do with the recognition that they'd found something worth fighting for. Caelum's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheek with reverent gentleness. "Lyra," he whispered, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer, like a promise, like the beginning of something that could reshape the world. "I know this wasn't what either of us wanted, but—" She silenced him with her lips, rising on her toes to close the distance between them. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, a question asked in the language of touch, but when he responded, when his arms came around her and pulled her closer, it became something else entirely. A declaration, a claiming, a moment of perfect unity between two souls that had been searching for home without knowing it. Power exploded around them as their essences merged, light and shadow dancing in spirals that painted the garden in impossible colors. The flowers sang, the fountains laughed, and the very air seemed to celebrate the birth of something unprecedented. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, both changed in ways that went deeper than magic. "Well," Lyra said, her voice unsteady, "that was terrifying," Caelum finished, but he was smiling, his golden eyes bright with joy and wonder, and the dawning realization that some things were worth any risk. But when a kiss can literally reshape reality, what happens next becomes a question that could save two worlds, or destroy them both. The days that followed their first kiss were a study in exquisite torture. Every glance became loaded with meaning, every accidental touch sent electricity racing through their bond, every moment alone together crackled with tension that neither dared to fully acknowledge. They were walking a tightrope between duty and desire, and the fall would be spectacular. "This is insane," Lyra muttered, pacing the length of their shared study while Caelum tried to focus on diplomatic correspondence. "We're supposed to be maintaining a political alliance, not—" She gestured vaguely at the space between them, where the air itself seemed to shimmer with unspoken want. "Not what?" Caelum asked, setting down his pen and giving her his full attention. The simple act of being looked at by him made her skin feel too tight, made her want things she'd never allowed herself to consider. Not falling for each other? Not discovering that we're compatible in ways that go far beyond magic? The honesty in his voice made her stop pacing, made her turn to face him fully. "Not complicating everything," she said, but even as the words left her lips, she knew it was too late. They'd already crossed that line, already stepped into territory that neither realm would approve of. "Come here," he said softly, and the command in his voice made something deep in her belly clench with want. When she didn't move, he stood, crossing to her with predatory grace that reminded her he was as much a warrior as she was. "Lyra, come here." She went, drawn by forces that had nothing to do with their magical bond, and everything to do with the way he looked at her, like she was precious, like she was chosen, like she was something more than the weapon she'd been shaped to be. When he reached for her, she didn't pull away. "The realms expect us to be tools," he murmured against her ear, his breath warm against her skin. "But what if we chose to be something else? What if we chose to be real?" His hands framed her face, thumbs tracing her cheekbones with reverent gentleness. "Real is dangerous," she whispered, but she was already leaning into his touch, already lost to the gravity of whatever was building between them. Real means we have something to lose. But when desire becomes stronger than duty, even the most disciplined hearts can break. and some breaks create cracks that let in light you never knew you needed. The ancient tome appeared in their library like a gift from fate itself, its pages yellowed with age and secrets that had been hidden for millennia. Lyra found it while searching for information about their combined abilities, drawn by an instinct she couldn't name to a shelf that definitely hadn't existed the day before. "Listen to this," she called, her voice tight with something between excitement and dread. Caelum looked up from his own research, immediately alert to the tension in her tone. "It's written in Old Celestial, but I think I can translate it. When shadow learns to love the light, and light finds beauty in the dark, the children of opposing realms shall birth a power to remake the world." The words hung in the air between them like a blade waiting to fall. Caelum crossed to where she sat, reading over her shoulder, his presence warm and solid against her back. "There's more," he said quietly, pointing to text that seemed to writhe and shift under their combined gaze. "Look at the next passage. But beware the union born of prophecy, for love that is foretold may be love that is false. Only in choosing freely, in defying the very fate that binds them, can the shadow-touched and light-bearer find truth." Lyra's voice cracked on the last words, and she felt Caelum's hands tighten on her shoulders. "Jesus," he breathed, using that human oath again. "It's saying that everything we feel, everything between us, it might not be real. It might just be destiny pulling our strings, making us dance to some cosmic tune we don't even understand." The possibility hit them both like a physical blow. How could they trust their feelings, when those feelings might be nothing more than magical manipulation? How could they know if their love was real, or just another form of bondage, more subtle but no less binding than the political alliance that had brought them together? "No," Lyra said suddenly, turning in his arms to face him fully. "No, I don't accept that. What I feel for you," she pressed her hand to his chest, over his heart. "This isn't prophecy. This isn't fate. This is choice. My choice." Caelum's smile was fierce, bright as the sun breaking through storm clouds. "Then we make our own destiny," he said, covering her hand with his. "We choose each other, not because some ancient text says we should, but because we want to, because what we have is worth fighting for. But when love must prove itself against the weight of destiny, the greatest battle isn't against external enemies. It's against the doubt that whispers in the dark corners of your own heart." The storm that night was unlike anything the threshold had ever seen, as if the very elements were responding to the tension crackling between its inhabitants. Lightning painted the castle walls in stark relief, while thunder shook the foundations. And through it all, Lyra and Caelum stood at opposite ends of their shared chambers, the weight of the prophecy hanging between them like an unsheathed blade. "We could stop," Caelum said, his voice barely audible over the storm's fury. "We could step back, maintain the political alliance without—" He gestured helplessly at the space between them, where the air itself seemed to pulse with unspoken desire. "Without risking everything we are for something that might not even be real." Lyra laughed, but there was no humor in it, only the sharp edge of someone who'd spent centuries making impossible choices. "You think I don't know the risks? You think I haven't calculated every possible way this could destroy us both?" She moved closer, shadows writhing around her feet like living things. "But here's the thing about being an assassin. You learn to trust your instincts above everything else, and my instincts are screaming that this is real." Lightning illuminated her face, revealing eyes that burned with fierce determination and something deeper, vulnerability that she'd never shown another living soul. "I've killed for duty, bled for loyalty, sacrificed everything I ever wanted for the greater good. But this?" She reached for him, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw with reverent gentleness. "This, I choose for me." The last of his resistance crumbled like walls before a siege, his hands tangled in her hair, pulling her against him with desperate hunger. And when their lips met, the storm outside seemed to pause in recognition of something far more powerful than wind and rain. This wasn't the tentative exploration of their first kiss. This was claiming, choosing, the moment when two souls decided to burn together rather than freeze apart. Power exploded around them as their essences merged completely, light and shadow becoming something entirely new. The castle itself seemed to sigh with satisfaction as walls shifted and rooms rearranged themselves, creating a space that belonged to neither realm, but to them alone, a sanctuary built from their combined will and desire. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, both fundamentally changed. No going back, Lyra whispered against his lips, and it wasn't a question, but a promise, a vow that went deeper than any ceremony or treaty. No going back, Caelum agreed, and as he lifted her in his arms, carrying her toward a bed that materialized from their shared dreams, both knew they'd crossed a threshold that would reshape not just their own destinies, but the fate of two entire realms. But when two hearts choose each other against all odds, the universe itself must decide whether to bless their union or tear them apart before they can change everything. The messages arrived simultaneously, as if both realms had been watching and waiting for this exact moment. Lyra woke to find a shadow wraith perched on her windowsill, its form writhing with barely contained malice as it delivered the Shadow Council's summons. Across the room, Caelum stared at a scroll that blazed with holy fire, the Light Tribunal's seal burning like a brand against his palm. "Well," Lyra said, her voice deceptively calm as she read the Council's demands. "It seems our honeymoon period is officially over. They want me back in the Shadow Realm, immediately, for consultation regarding my performance and loyalty." She crumpled the message, and it dissolved into ash that tasted like bitter endings. Caelum's jaw was tight as granite as he scanned his own summons. The tribunal is equally diplomatic. They're questioning whether I've been compromised by prolonged exposure to shadow influence. He looked up, golden eyes blazing with fury. "They're calling our bond a corruption, a disease that needs to be cured." The castle around them seemed to sense their distress, walls shifting to create a more defensible space, windows narrowing to slits that would be harder for enemies to breach. Even their sanctuary recognized that war was coming, that the peace they'd built together was about to be tested in ways that could destroy everything they'd created. "They know," Lyra said quietly, moving to stand beside him at the window that overlooked their impossible garden. "About us, about what we've become. Someone's been watching, reporting back." The flowers below seemed to droop with sorrow, as if they too understood that paradise was always temporary. "Let them come," Caelum said, his light beginning to pulse with battle readiness. "Let them try to tear apart what we've built. They'll find out that some bonds can't be broken by politics or threats or—" "No." Lyra's voice cut through his building fury like a blade through silk. "We go. We face them on their terms, in their domains. Because if we don't—" She turned to face him fully, and he saw the weight of centuries in her dark eyes. "They'll bring the war here, to our home, and I won't let them destroy the only place I've ever been happy." The decision hung between them like a sword waiting to fall. They could fight, could barricade themselves in their castle, and dare both realms to come for them. Or they could walk willingly into what might very well be a trap, trusting that their love was strong enough to survive whatever trials awaited. But when home becomes something worth protecting, sometimes the only way to save it is to leave it behind, and some journeys test not just your strength, but your very soul. The Shadow Realm hadn't changed in the weeks since Lyra's departure, but returning felt like stepping into a tomb. The air itself seemed thicker here, weighted with centuries of secrets and blood, and every shadow whispered reminders of who she used to be before golden eyes and gentle touches had taught her there was another way to live. "Welcome home, little shadow." Master Vex materialized from the darkness like a nightmare-given form, his smile sharp enough to cut glass. "The Council has been eager to discuss your recent activities. Your reports have been somewhat lacking in detail regarding your husband's weaknesses." Lyra kept her face carefully neutral, falling back on decades of training that had taught her to hide every emotion behind a mask of professional indifference. "The Guardian is well protected by ancient magic. Discovering exploitable weaknesses takes time." The lies tasted like ash on her tongue, but they were necessary armor in a place where truth could be weaponized. "Time," Vex repeated, circling her like a predator scenting weakness. "Yes, you've had quite a lot of that, haven't you? Time to grow, comfortable with your assignment. Time to forget where your true loyalties lie." His voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. "Time to betray everything you've ever been." The council chamber stretched before her like a cathedral of nightmares, 7 figures shrouded in darkness so complete it seemed to devour hope itself. She'd stood here countless times, receiving orders that had shaped her into the perfect weapon. Now, for the first time in 3 centuries, she felt like prey instead of predator. "Lyra Nightwhisper," the center figure spoke. voice echoing from everywhere and nowhere. You have served faithfully for 300 years. Your blade has never wavered, your loyalty never questioned. Until now. The words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples that would reshape everything. Tell us, assassin, do you still serve the shadow? The question hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. Around her, the darkness pressed closer, seeking cracks in her resolve, weaknesses that could be exploited. But in her mind, she held tight to the memory of golden light and impossible gardens, of a love that had taught her she could be more than just a weapon. But when loyalty becomes a choice instead of a given, the hardest battles are fought not with blades, but with the courage to stand for what you believe, even when it costs you everything you used to be. The silence in the council chamber stretched like a bowstring pulled to its breaking point, and Lyra felt the weight of 3 centuries pressing down on her shoulders like a mountain of expectations and blood. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the steady calm of someone who had already made an impossible choice. "I serve balance," she said, the words falling into the darkness like stones into a deep well. "I serve the treaty that binds our realms in peace instead of tearing them apart in endless war. If that's not enough for you, then perhaps you need to reconsider what service truly means." The temperature in the chamber dropped 20 degrees in an instant. Master Vex's laugh was like breaking glass, sharp and cutting and full of malicious delight. "Balance," he repeated, savoring the word like fine wine. "How diplomatic of you. But we're not interested in diplomacy tonight, little shadow. We're interested in results." The center figure leaned forward, and for a moment Lyra caught a glimpse of eyes like dying stars, ancient and cold, and utterly without mercy. "The Guardian has made you weak," the voice whispered, somehow reaching her ears despite the vast space between them. "His light has infected you, turned you into something soft and useless. But we can fix that. We can burn the weakness out of you and restore what you were meant to be." "And if I refuse?" Lyra asked, though she already knew the answer. She'd always known this moment would come, had felt it approaching like a storm on the horizon. The only question was whether she'd face it as the weapon they'd made her, or as the woman she'd chosen to become. Master Vex's smile widened, revealing teeth like polished obsidian. "Then you watch your precious guardian die slowly, piece by piece, while his realm burns around him. We have agents in place, assassins who make you look like a child playing with toys. One word from us, and Caelum's light goes out forever." He paused, letting the threat sink in like poison. "Unless, of course, you do it yourself." The ultimatum hit her like a physical blow. Kill the man she loved, or watch him die anyway while everything they'd built together turned to ash. It was elegant in its cruelty, perfectly designed to exploit the one weakness she'd never had before, something to lose that mattered more than her own life. "You have until dawn," the center figure intoned, rising from its throne of shadows. "Bring us his heart, and your place among us is secure. Fail, and you'll watch him suffer in ways that will make death seem like mercy." The council began to dissolve back into the darkness from which they'd come. "Choose wisely, little shadow. Some betrayals can never be undone, but when love becomes both your greatest strength and your most dangerous weakness, the choice between salvation and damnation might be closer than you ever imagined." The Light Tribunal's judgment hall blazed with radiance so pure it would have blinded mortal eyes, but Caelum stood unmoved in its center, his own light steady and unwavering, despite the accusations raining down on him like arrows. He'd known this moment would come from the instant he'd chosen to heal Lyra's wounds, instead of letting shadow poison do the tribunal's work for them. "Guardian Caelum," the High Arbiter's voice rang like silver bells and funeral dirges combined, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. "For 3 centuries you have served without question, your light pure and untainted by the darkness that seeks to corrupt all things. Yet now you stand before us changed, diminished, infected by shadow's touch. I stand before you evolved," Caelum replied, his voice carrying the quiet strength of someone who had found something worth dying for. "I've learned that light without shadow has no meaning, no depth, no truth. What you call infection, I call completion." The assembled tribunal recoiled as if he'd struck them, their combined radiance flickering with shock and disgust. To beings who had spent millennia believing in the absolute purity of light, his words were nothing short of heresy, a fundamental challenge to everything they held sacred. "The shadow witch has poisoned your mind," another arbiter declared, her voice sharp with righteous fury. "Twisted your thoughts until you can no longer distinguish between salvation and damnation, but we can cleanse you, restore what you were meant to be. All you need do is renounce her, dissolve the bond that chains you to darkness." Caelum's laugh was soft, but carried the weight of absolute certainty. "You want me to cut out my own heart and call it healing. You want me to destroy the best part of myself and pretend it's salvation." He stepped forward, and his light blazed brighter, not with the harsh radiance of judgment, but with the warm glow of truth freely chosen. "I won't do it. I can't do it. She's not my weakness. She's my strength." "Then you leave us no choice," the High Arbiter said, raising a hand that blazed with power enough to unmake stars. "If you will not be cleansed willingly, then you will be purified by force. The shadow's influence will be burned from your essence, even if it destroys you in the process. Wait." Caelum's voice cut through the building energy like a blade through silk. "There's another way. A trade." He straightened, every inch the guardian he'd been trained to be, but his eyes held depths that spoke of love and loss and choices that would echo through eternity. "Take my power, strip away my light, cast me out from your realm, but leave her alone. Let Lyra live free without the shadow of your judgment hanging over her." The offer hung in the blazing air like a sword waiting to fall, and in that moment, Caelum proved that some sacrifices are made not from duty, but from love so pure it can illuminate even the darkest corners of the universe. But when someone offers to give up everything for your happiness, the debt becomes more than gratitude. It becomes a responsibility that can reshape the very foundations of your soul. Dawn was breaking over the threshold when Lyra returned, but she didn't come alone. Behind her walked figures that shouldn't exist, shadow-touched beings whose darkness pulsed with warm light, light-bearers whose radiance carried depths of gentle shadow. They were the outcasts, the questioners, the ones who had dared to dream of something beyond the eternal war between their realms. "You came," Caelum said, and his voice carried wonder and relief and love so fierce it made the air itself shimmer. He stood in the castle's great hall, surrounded by his own collection of rebels, guardians who had grown tired of blind obedience, light-touched beings who had seen beauty in darkness and refused to look away. "Did you really think I'd choose them over you?" Lyra asked, crossing to him with steps that seemed to dance between shadow and light. "Did you think 3 centuries of conditioning could outweigh 3 weeks of actually living?" She reached for his hands, and when their fingers intertwined, power crackled between them like captured lightning. Around them, their unlikely army watched in fascination as light and shadow began their eternal dance, creating something that belonged to neither realm, but somehow encompassed both. These were beings who had risked everything to be here: exile, death, the loss of everything they'd ever known, because they believed in the possibility of something better. "The councils won't accept this," said Sarah, a former light-bearer, whose radiance now carried threads of gentle darkness. "They'll see it as rebellion, as corruption that needs to be cleansed. They'll come for us with everything they have." "Let them come," Lyra said, her voice carrying the steel that had made her the Shadow Realm's most feared assassin. "We're not running anymore. We're not hiding what we are or apologizing for what we've become. If they want a war, we'll give them one. But it'll be fought on our terms, for our vision of what the world could be." Caelum's light pulsed with agreement, with determination that had been forged in the fires of love and tempered by the willingness to sacrifice everything for what was right. "We're not just fighting for ourselves," he said, addressing the assembled rebels. "We're fighting for every being who's ever looked across the divide and wondered what it would be like to bridge it instead of widening it." The castle around them hummed with approval, its walls shifting and expanding to accommodate their growing numbers. This was no longer just a home. It was a fortress, a symbol, a beacon that called to everyone who had ever dreamed of unity instead of division. But when revolution is born from love instead of hatred, it carries a power that can reshape the world, or tear it apart in ways that no one can predict. The armies came at sunset, when the sky burned with colors that belonged to neither realm, but somehow encompassed both. From the east, the forces of light advanced in perfect formation, their radiance so intense it turned the horizon into a wall of blazing glory. From the west, the Shadow Legion flowed like living darkness, their forms shifting and writhing with malevolent purpose. "Well," Lyra said, standing beside Caelum on the castle's highest tower, "I guess diplomacy is officially off the table." Her daggers sang as she drew them, shadows writhing around the blades like living things eager for battle. Any last words before we either save the world or destroy it completely? Just one, Caelum replied, his sword blazing to life in his hands. I love you. Whatever happens down there, whatever we have to do to protect what we've built, I love you, and I choose you, and I'd rather die fighting beside you than live without you. The words hit her like a physical blow, warm and fierce and absolutely certain. Damn it, she whispered, rising on her toes to kiss him with desperate intensity. You're not allowed to be romantic right before a battle. It's terrible strategy. But she was smiling as she said it, her heart full of light that had nothing to do with magic and everything to do with love. The battle began with a sound like the world ending, the clash of opposing forces that had been building toward this moment for millennia. Light met shadow in explosions that painted the sky in impossible colors, while the rebels fought with a coordination that spoke of shared purpose rather than blind obedience. Lyra and Caelum moved as one, their combined power carving through enemy ranks like a blade through silk. Where his light touched her shadows, they became something new. Not the absence of illumination, but its perfect complement, creating depths and textures that were more beautiful than either element alone. The councils, Caelum called over the sound of battle, pointing to where the leaders of both realms had taken the field personally. If we can reach them, if we can show them what we've become, they'll try to destroy us, Lyra finished. But she was already moving, shadows carrying her across the battlefield with inhuman speed. But that's what we signed up for when we chose love over duty. Some things are worth the risk. The final confrontation took place in the space between armies, where twilight reigned eternal and the impossible had become inevitable. As the councils raised their combined power to obliterate the rebels once and for all, Lyra and Caelum stood together, their love blazing brighter than any weapon, ready to prove that some bonds are stronger than the forces that seek to break them. But when the ultimate battle is fought not with weapons but with the courage to be vulnerable, victory might look nothing like what anyone expected. The silence that followed the battle was more profound than any sound, the kind of quiet that comes when the world holds its breath, waiting to see what will rise from the ashes of everything that came before. Lyra and Caelum stood in the center of what had once been a battlefield, their combined power still crackling in the air around them, like the memory of lightning. It's over, Caelum said, but his voice carried wonder rather than relief. Around them, the landscape itself was changing, shadows and light weaving together to create something entirely new, a realm that belonged to neither darkness nor radiance but somehow encompassed both. The old order. It's actually over. The councils lay defeated, but not destroyed, their ancient power broken by the simple truth that love could indeed conquer the hatred that had divided the realms for millennia. Some of their followers had fled, unable to accept a world where their fundamental beliefs had been proven wrong. Others remained, staring in fascination at the impossible beauty being born from the merger of opposing forces. Look, Lyra whispered, pointing to where their castle stood transformed. No longer a structure caught between realms, it had become something magnificent. A palace of twilight where shadow and light danced in perfect harmony, creating architecture that defied description, but somehow felt like home to everyone who saw it. The rebels who had fought beside them were changing too, their essences evolving as the barriers between light and shadow dissolved. They were becoming something new, beings who carried both radiance and darkness within them, living proof that unity was not only possible, but beautiful, beyond imagination. The cost, Sarah said, approaching with tears streaming down her face. So many lost, so much destroyed. Was it worth it? The question hung in the air like a prayer seeking an answer, and Lyra felt the weight of every life that had been sacrificed for this moment. Ask me in 100 years, Lyra replied, taking Caelum's hand as they surveyed their transformed world. When children grow up never knowing that light and shadow were supposed to be enemies, when love is stronger than the fear that kept us apart for so long. She squeezed his fingers, drawing strength from his presence. Then we'll know if it was worth it. The new realm stretched before them like a promise made manifest, beautiful and terrible and absolutely unprecedented. They had won, but victory had come at a price that would echo through eternity, the complete transformation of everything they had ever known. But when you tear down the walls that divide the world, you discover that some endings are actually beginnings, And some prices are worth paying for the chance to build something better. 6 months later, the Twilight Realm had become something that would have been impossible to imagine in the old world, a place where former enemies worked side by side, where children played games that involved both shadow and light, where love was celebrated instead of feared. The transformation hadn't been easy, but it had been real. Lyra stood in their garden, watching Caelum teach a group of young ones how to weave light and shadow together into patterns of impossible beauty. His patience was infinite, his joy infectious, and seeing him like this, not as a weapon or a guardian, but simply as a man who had found his purpose, made her heart swell with emotions she was still learning to name. Regrets? He asked later, as they walked through streets where shadow touched and light bearers lived as neighbors instead of enemies. The question had become a ritual between them, a way of checking in on the magnitude of what they'd chosen to do. "Only one," Lyra said, and his step faltered slightly until she continued. "I regret that it took us so long to figure out that we were stronger together than apart. Think of all the time we wasted being afraid of what we might become." She leaned into his warmth, marveling at how natural it felt to seek comfort in someone else's presence. Their palace, no longer a castle caught between realms, but a true home, rose before them like a testament to the power of love to reshape reality. The walls sang with their combined essences, the gardens bloomed with flowers that existed nowhere else, and every room held memories of the journey that had brought them here. "The councils are requesting another meeting," Caelum said as they climbed the steps to their chambers. "The remnants, anyway. They want to discuss terms for a more formal peace treaty." His tone was carefully neutral, but she could feel his amusement through their bond. "Let them come," Lyra said, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had faced the worst the world could offer and emerged victorious. "We'll listen to what they have to say, but the terms are non-negotiable. Unity, equality, and the right for every being to choose their own path." She paused at their bedroom door, turning to face him fully. "We've proven that love can conquer hatred. Now we get to prove that it can build something lasting." As they stood together in the doorway of their shared life, surrounded by the impossible beauty they had created from the ashes of an ancient war, both knew that their story was far from over. They had rewritten the rules of reality itself, and now they had eternity to explore what that meant. Because some love stories don't end with happily ever after. They end with, and their adventure was just beginning, proving that the greatest magic of all is the courage to choose each other, again and again, for all the days that follow.